Welcome, strangers, to Talkumentary, a show where we watch documentaries and then get together and talk about them.
Well, I can only say one thing. I wouldn't have missed it. It was terrible at times, but I wouldn't have missed it.
I can only say that I've never been so excited in my life. This was like a boy going to play for the first time.
I never realized there was anything unusual about it. There was a job to be done, and you just got on and did it.
I don't regret having experienced this episode of Talkumentary at all. I wish I hadn't, but I don't regret it. Because here we are, and we're safe. Welcome, everyone, to the 33rd episode of Talkumentary. Stand up, soldiers, polish those buttons, piss in your boots, and don't get stuck in the mud. Because we're going to war this evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Captain Kolaski. I will be leading the charge this fine evening. Righto. Let's take muster, shall we? Sergeant Major Dolan Nicholas.
Aye, aye, here, sir.
You'll lead the bombardiers to the west. Corporal Hoins, Connor.
Yes, sir.
I need you to fix bayonets and prepare the charge.
Righto, let's go, boys.
Private NECA, Brice.
Oh, I got promoted.
Go fix the poop beam, please. Someone broke it and fell right into the muck.
Third time this week.
You're so good at fixing it, though. It's funny how real that is. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, Nick and Connor, thanks for joining Talkumentary, boys.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know, which is pretty much everyone who's listened to this, Connor works with Brice and I at a museum, and Nick has been a friend of mine for a long time, trivia buddy. Maybe someday our trivia podcast will come out, but here it sits in the ether as of right now. But hi, Nick.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Long-time listener and first-time collaborator.
Oh, yeah, I should point out, too, our number one fan is sitting in the room in the green chair. That is Nick Dolan. I always appreciate your feedback on these episodes, my friend.
Yeah, I have an opinion.
You do have an opinion, and I like it. Connor, how do you feel about the podcast so far? And that by that meaning our first, 20, 30 episodes.
Well, I mean, I loved them. I've watched every single episode. I mean,
well,
I can...
the fact that you just said you watched the episodes lets me know you haven't listened to a single one.
Look. I can listen. When you go on YouTube, you can watch a podcast. All right.
Well, that's true, I suppose. But you haven't watched any of them, so.
This is how it's going to be. Oh, I said it before you started recording. It's going to be like this all night for me.
Yep. All right. So we all are. Hey, Brice, thanks for being here, man.
Oh, yeah, man.
Tried and true.
Yeah.
The classic.
The golden retriever of Talkumentary. Thanks, everybody. Before we trudge our way through the mud, I'm going to get a few things out of the way. Since we found out that no one listens to the end of our show, even though you should, because a whole bunch of cool shit happens at the end of the show. But I'm going to say this now. So gas. Everyone put on your gas mask while I say, please go and rate and review our podcast on your favorite podcast streaming service and let us know what you think of our show. It means a lot to us when we see a like or a comment or a thumbs up or something like that. You can find us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram. Look for us at Talkumentary Podcast. Or if you want to email us and say why we're full of shit about something that we said, or correct us on how we pronounced a town name or something like that, info.talkumentary@gmail.com. I promise we'll read it. And if you talk smack about us, we will talk smack about you on the show. That's a promise. This week, though, I know I'm in a great mood today. Last week, I was not feeling the greatest, and we had a very depressing documentary. And this one, though it's full of some gloominess, some gore, some not wonderful topics, it was, in my opinion, a very good documentary. So this week, we took a trip back to the early 1900s through the eyes of British soldiers on the Western Front of WW1. With the help of a 99-minute documentary titled They Shall Not Grow Old. This documentary uses never-before-seen footage of the Great War and tells the story of what it was like to be a soldier, rather than just recounting the events of the war, which I thought was really cool about this documentary. It's not just what happened, it's the people in it, which I thought was sweet. Using state-of-the-art remastering, colorization, and sound editing, we get a visceral look into the lives of these soldiers and the things they went through on the front lines. Filmmakers reviewed 600 hours of interviews from 200 veterans and 100 hours of original film footage to weave together this beautiful yet horrific story of real men being ordered to do unthinkable things. Here is the trailer.
I was 16 years old and my father allowed me to go.
I was just turned 17 at the time.
I was 16. I was 15 years.
When they came to us, they were frightened children and had to be made into soldiers.
Right, boys, here it comes. We're in the pictures.
I gave every part of my youth to do a job.
On this part of the trench over there.
There was a job to be done, and you just got on and did it.
I know that was a trailer that was very much made for the visual arts, but nothing puts you quite in the somber mood of watching and talking about a documentary like this, quite like I wish I knew who their music person was, but a Peter Jackson film, right? Nothing puts you quite in the epic mood quite like that. This was a sombering one. Thoughts, guys? Give me your initial what'd you think of this, Nick?
Yeah, it was I guess not quite what I expected. I expected probably the typical war documentary where there was kind of some historical explanation of what was going on, and there really wasn't any of that. And so we were getting all this firsthand account, you know, in a linear fashion. And they did tell a story, and they started from, you know, when war was announced, and, you know, and they went along the whole way until the war was over, and and kind of wove these firsthand accounts in. But it was kind of crazy because as true Brits, because it was from the British point of view, you know, they're very stiff upper lip, just very matter of fact. But, you know, it's kind of when a guy like that kind of starts breaking down, which there wasn't any full breakdowns, but I mean,
some stuff that got pretty close.
But when you know, when you could hear that emotion in their voice, it really does affect you.
Yeah, for sure. Connor, man, first impressions of this one.
I can say it definitely shows what I feel, and I don't know if this is going to make sense, but the dichotomy between World War I and World War II. Okay. World War II, and I say this because a lot of Americans don't particularly know about World War I because we were in it so little. But World War II is it's this big heroic war where, you know, the GIs come in and they storm Normandy
and they fight the evil
Nazis and stuff like that. And so it's Inglourious Bastards.
Right.
It's stuff like that. And sure, there have been things like Band of Brothers in the Pacific that have done a great job at exploring the horrors of World War II.
Sure.
But a lot of people still have in that mind the propaganda for World War II was really good.
Oh, so
and made it seem like a very heroic war. But you look back at World War I, and it's in World War I. I hesitate to say this because this might sound a little bit bad, but there are no bad guys in World War I like there are in World War II. And
yeah,
so,
it's not as cut and dried of a this is the villain and these are the good guys.
Yeah, and so you. Yeah, you don't really have a Captain America of World War I, and so it's a lot of, you know, this is the first real modern war. This is where you get machine guns and tanks and airplanes and death on. Not to say that there hadn't been death on in mass scales in other wars, but just so
gruesome.
Yeah,
just gruesome.
It's more. Look, a machine gun team, 2 men could take out platoons. Yeah. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of soldiers, and the tactics just weren't evolved enough to just go over the top.
Yeah,
and so
we climb out of this and we walk across the field and we hope we make it.
We hope we make it. I think this does a very good job of capturing World War I's very, you know, tragic in a way of these. I mean, we heard it in the trailer. I mean, all of these, like, so many of these young boys went off to war because they had read about it in stories. My father had fought in X war and things like that, and it was this great heroic thing. And
this is not your grandfather's war.
No. This is I'm sitting in a muddy trench that's up to my ankles in water that's probably mixed with feces,
and I've got to cut my feet off now.
Yeah, and I got to cut my feet off now.
Yeah.
So.
One thing I didn't kind of ask before we started. So, both Nick and Connor, could you, Nick, I'll start with you, man. Can you tell me why you were interested in doing the show, specifically on this documentary, and like what your interest is? Brice, we'll get to you. Hang on.
Oh yeah. I believe you.
Yeah, I mean, I was a history major in college. I mean, I've always enjoyed history, you know, military history specifically, but more personally, I had a great grandfather who I met. He did die in 1988 when I was 7 years old, but I actually did get to know him, who served in World War I. And anyway, you know, wow. I don't remember a lot of the stories. I was a 7-year-old, so he probably didn't tell me a whole lot of the stories.
But he left some things
I've gotten some stuff secondhand, but yes, I've always been kind of fascinated from that standpoint. And then, you know, in that trailer, they're talking about all these 16, 17-year-old boys that joined the war.
Yeah.
And we have his dog tags from when he served, and it has his birth date as 1899, and he was actually born in 1900. So just like all these other young boys,
wow,
he lied about his age to join the war. And, and you know, you were talking about them doing it for the heroics, and I'm sure there was a aspect of that. But I think there was a lot of young, poor, I'm going to keep saying boys because they were boys.
That's who was enlisting,
And, you know, it was a way out of the life that they were living, of just basically being poor and not having
that was wild.
Options.
Yeah, that was wild to hear about in that documentary. It was actually kind of better to go to war than what I was doing beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, what? That's fucking nuts.
And I'll definitely say I think what's even more tragic is the fact that they got out of the army and then people were like, no, we don't really want you to, you know, veterans need not apply. They say at the very end, and it's like, oh my God, which is crazy to think of now because, I mean, some people I think would say like, even then we don't do enough for veterans, but what we do now is more than we did then.
Yep. So Connor, what about you, man? Why this documentary? Why history? why did I call you and say, Connor, do you want to do this World War I history documentary?
Well, I have a lot of the same reasons as Nick. I was a history major in college.
Yep.
I currently work at a museum. I'm hoping one day to be to work in the collections of the National World War I Museum in the United States, which is down in Kansas City. I've ever since I was a teenager, I got really into World War II, and then somewhere along the line, I felt like I knew everything about World War II, even though I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, what can I do next? And I was like, oh, I might as well go back to World War I. And it was shocking just how different everything is portrayed in World War I than it is in World War II.
For sure.
And also the term doughboy, which was the term for American soldiers before GI became the big thing in World War II. I love that.
Yeah.
I use like all my online usernames are the doughboy because I love that.
So if you're out there and you're watching or listening and you want to find Connor on Discord, it's probably doughboy something.
Yeah, it's doughboy something. But yeah, so cool. I also had a relative fight in World War I, although he was like an uncle, and I didn't even know until like a couple years ago. My grandmother sent me like it was like Uncle like Clifford or something. That fought in World War I.
I know him.
Yeah, as an American soldier, and it was cool. It was cool.
I mean, it's nice to find those things.
Yeah.
Brice,
Yeah.
thanks for being here, man.
Oh yeah.
What'd you think about this documentary? You had seen this one before we ever even talked about it.
Yeah, this came out to select theaters when it first came out, and I was lucky enough to be on vacation near a select theater. So
by vacation, you mean homeless in your van parked in the parking lot, or
no? This was way before then.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, cool.
But no, I went and saw it in theaters, and just the huge undertaking of taking footage.
Yeah,
that was shot at many different frame rates.
Yeah,
and trying to line that up, and then remove all of the damage that age 100 years has caused it.
Yeah.
And turn it into a documentary of just fully archival footage and all the testimonies.
What an undertaking.
Yeah.
Man. I mean, that's huge. I agree, man.
I cannot imagine the work that went into that.
I know how long it takes me to make one of our stupid little like Instagram reels for this show. To do something on a grander scale and with some real like content that you have to cut down, like no wonder it costs so much to make movies, because that is a lot of work, man.
Yeah, give this episode 100 years and then see what we can do with it.
See what we can do with it.
Yeah. All right, so this film was directed by none other than Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. Produced by Claire Olson and Peter Jackson, this film was a Wingnut Films and House Productions production. Distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures, streamed on Netflix and Max. They Shall Not Grow Old is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes with a 99% tomato meter with 156 reviews and 92% audience score with over 1,000 ratings. So pretty damn good scores. Here are a few of those audience ratings. A 5-star rating from someone called Dumpy. So Dumpy?
Dumpy.
Yeah, Dumpy says, quote, a must-see film depicting the horrors of war by the ones who fought and survived. The revamped footage, along with commentary sharing individual stories of their experiences, makes for a compelling movie on the Great War. And I did find a half-star rating from a dude named Frank Castillo. And he says, and I quote, disliked the so-called movie. Very disappoint. I could have gone to YouTube and seen the same. So fuck you, Frank Castillo.
Frank, I don't think that's accurate.
I don't think so either. I don't think you can go to YouTube and find the same. Good luck to you.
Man's got like a secret YouTube like app he goes to.
Right. Like, what is this guy?
Someone posting archival footage on YouTube?
Yeah, come on. All right. Anyway, we'll have a link with show, what is it called? Credits in the show notes. Let's get into it. This is your spoiler alert. If you want to watch this before we ruin it, if we haven't already, go and watch it. Otherwise, just hang with us, get into the trenches with us.
Give me my Winchester.
You got your Winchester locked and loaded. But that wasn't very English, was it?
That was American.
Okay, fair enough. So, had anyone besides Brice seen this before we watched it for our show, Nick?
No, I had not.
Nope, not at all.
Me neither. What were your predictions going into it? I mean, Brice, you've seen it, so just keep your mouth shut. I know that you're a talkative fella, but Nick, predictions going into this, you sort of talked about it a little bit, expecting it to sort of be a, your sort of run-of-the-mill. And then in 1991, woof, dang.
The Great War went on for a while.
Yeah.
That has been a long war.
No, I mean, I can kind of add to that a little bit. I was kind of expecting, like text every once in a while to kind of give you some frame of reference. I was expecting maybe a narrator to come in every once in a while.
I thought so
Same
too.
Here.
Did you like that it didn't have a narrator?
The first watching, I watched it twice because I felt like I was rough on it the first time.
Are you like me where you have to be in the right mood, and if you're in like I just had a long day at work and I'm watching this and I don't really feel like it, so I'm not gonna like it as much as I should.
Yeah, and I mean there's that, and I think part of it too is being like the history guy I am, as opposed to like I'm very, I'd have to get. I don't know which brain is. They say left brain, right?
Sure.
Brain.
Yeah.
I think that's all bonk anyway. But
okay.
But
another discussion for another
controversial opinions.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not an artistic type of person. I'm very facts based.
Sure, I can see that.
So I love it when I get that historical reference. So the first time I watched it, I'm like, I was a little down on that. The second time I watched it, I definitely felt the artistic vision a lot more.
This I definitely hear what you're saying, and this was very much a cinematic filmmaker's documentary. I mean, when you find out that Peter Jackson made it, like, oh, the score was nice, the transitions were nice, the storytelling was nice. That's what you want in a cinematic feature, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe not what someone that like yourself is looking for in a straight up documentary, but I'm glad you could at least see the appeal to that. Yeah. I personally liked that there wasn't a narrator when I watched it. I liked that the story was told by the soldiers, but what about you, Connor? Predictions going in, did it live up to it? Did it let you down?
Nick, you and I are very much the same in this regard. I also thought it was going to be a more typical documentary with a narrator and stuff like that. At the time, I had completely forgot who Peter Jackson was, literally until you just mentioned...
Blasphemy!
I was going to say, literally until you mentioned Lord of the Rings, I was like, now it all makes sense.
You shall not watch.
But
you don't listen to our show. You don't know who Peter Jackson is.
Look,
How
I do.
friends?
It was a brain fart, all right? But... So, I went in expecting... I guess I didn't realize it was, when was this made?
I don't remember. I don't have the year written down for some reason, which I normally do.
You were there, Brice.
Yeah.
What year was it?
I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe.
There you go.
Okay.
6.
So the thing is, I was under the impression that this was like a streaming original, that this was like a Netflix original or something like that. And so what my thoughts going in was this going to be
2018.
2018. Okay. Okay, so
nailed it.
My thoughts were going to be, it was going to be a more in-depth dive. Like we were going to talk about theaters of war that rarely get covered, things like the Italian front or the war with the Ottoman Empire between them and the British. But when I got in there, I realized, oh, this is just about the British.
Right.
And I was really disappointed. Because I was like, I already know about the British. I know what they're going to talk about. I love the Western Front. Don't get me wrong. That's sure. My favorite part of the war. But it's like, I already know all about this. We've covered it a million times. But when I thought about, first of all, I was super impressed that it was all from the soldiers' point of view. I really loved that. And then I thought about, well, I don't know that this was necessarily made for someone like me.
Okay.
What I think it was made for was for people who have never heard of World War One, who aren't interested in World War One because they aren't interested in learning about dates or battles. But when you add that human element into there, when you get the testimonial from the soldiers, people love that.
Yep.
And it you feel the connection.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we miss a lot of times. I can see the appeal in the straight to the point, these are the facts. This is when it happened. This is what was introduced. This is why we were doing it or why they were doing it. And, this is the outcome of it. Straight facts. Tell me the history. Yep. I get it. But myself, I want to know what it was like for the guys in the mud. And that's why I loved this documentary. I thought we don't hear that enough. You get it from, cinematic movies when they try to depict a war or something
stuff like
that.
1917.
Yeah. And
Good film, by the way.
I haven't seen it. Yeah. But the ability to sort of get into the head and into the shoes, I guess, or the boots of soldiers and sort of understand what it's like. But when I'm watching true to form documentaries like what you were talking about, Nick, part of me sits and goes, that guy sitting there, what was it like for him? And this scratched that itch for me. That was huge for me. Brice.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
do you like the documentaries that Nick and Connor like?
I do. But I think what I liked about this one is that it was so different than those. Because it is all archival footage. Like, the archive is like, hey, we have 100 hours of footage that has just been waiting for 100 years, and it's going bad. It's like, we got this gallon of milk. It's starting to go bad. We need to do something with it. And Peter Jackson makes a lovely cake out of it.
I don't know if I want to eat a cake with 100-year-old milk, but dang,
it's good stuff.
It's man. It's like
go to the moment.
It's like a fine whiskey.
That's right.
What are you drinking there, Nick?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. I got a Glenfiddich 18-year Scotch. I kind of wanted to put myself into a theme for this, and there was a couple different scenes in this movie where they showed Scottish soldiers, and they were still wearing kilts in
yes, they were
World War One.
Some of them without underwear.
Yeah, and that's another thing you touched on it with how different of a war it was, where we had all the technology, but we were still doing things the same way as we were in the past.
Yep.
And you've been to the World War One museum, and you see all of the uniforms.
The 1914 uniforms are beyond extravagant. Like the French come out in these bright blue and red pants. It's ridiculous.
Camouflage.
Yep.
I want you to see me coming.
I think World War One is probably where all of the stereotypes for all the different cultures across Europe and Asia must have come from, because they dressed exactly like you would think they would.
Yep. All right.
The Ottomans.
Yep. So this film follows a pretty cohesive timeline. I think we're going to kind of stick to it a little bit. I'll sort of take us through sort of what the soldiers talked about, and we'll comment on it. We'll hear a few sound clips from what they had to say. We start from the beginning of Britain's involvement with the war. The very first things we hear from the mouths of the soldiers who served was that they did not regret going to war. That was something that they would do again if they had the opportunity. They were excited to go to war. It's sort of with our little intro, we were sort of joking around a little bit, but that was sort of some of their comments about it. That was astonishing to me, not necessarily surprising, because this was pre the anti-war 60s and 70s. This was pre the internet. Yeah.
To wave the flag.
Yeah. This was when the pride in your country was, I don't want to, people weren't aware of as much of the things that were going on. They weren't as you were more likely to. The patriotism was huge, right? And
nationalism.
Thank you. And you hear that a lot with veterans. War becomes what they know, So what do you guys think when they were going through and talking about their excitement, they just went there. These are guys who had already gone through this war talking about, I don't regret it. Here I was. Is that stiff upper lip? Is that like unwillingness to admit that sucked?
I think that there's probably a degree to that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been there in life. You've made a decision and you're not going to admit that maybe that wasn't the best decision.
Give me one of yours. I'm kidding. Keep going.
But yeah, I mean, there were a ton of them that made the comment that they believed it was their duty.
Duty.
That's right.
We're going to be talking about that in a bit.
True.
Stay tuned.
That, it was a way to get out of the mundane of their actual lives. I believe that's a fairly direct quote.
Yeah.
And also you talked about the nationalism. They basically said this war will be over in a couple of weeks. We're superior to the Germans.
We'll be home by Christmas.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got this.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of that. I mean, there was definitely a lot of bravado at the onset, this part that Jeff kind of has described.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Jeff describes things sometimes. Brice, talk about, Nick was just mentioning the relief that some of these soldiers felt because it was almost like my life is boring. I don't really have much to live for. But they spent quite a bit of time talking about the age of these soldiers.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were supposed to be 19 to join, but we heard so many stories otherwise.
Yeah. There's a lot of 15-year-olds that lied and got into the war or walked up to the recruiter. They asked them their age. They said 17. Go back out there, come back in and tell me you're 19.
Yeah.
Like,
they literally say, go back outside and have another birthday.
Yeah.
And come back in and talk to me.
And one of the stories was a guy was walking down the street and a lady asked him if he was joining the war.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I can't, I'm only 15. And then she replied like, oh, that's what all the guys around here say.
Mm.
Like,
yeah.
So
like, that's not a very good excuse, kid. Like,
yeah,
get out there. Okay. Connor.
Yes.
You're the young man in the room.
I am the young man.
You're how old? Do you mind telling the world?
Well, I'm only 15. I'm 24. I'm 24.
24. So 15 wasn't that long ago compared to some of us in here.
Ooh.
Old coots.
As I look toward Nick and then think about I'm not that much younger than you.
No, you're not.
Yeah. 15 years old, man. Put yourself back, what was it, 9 years ago? When you were 15. War starts, right? Can you imagine this? Can you imagine walking into a recruiter's and going, I'm going?
It's funny. I think, first of all, I don't think I'd ever, the Army wouldn't take me because I'm autistic.
Okay.
Which would, maybe they would.
In World War I, they might have.
In World War I for sure. But it's funny because when I was younger, I went through like a huge like patriotism phase, and I still am. I still consider myself a pretty big patriot, but I went through this massive patriotism phase, and I remember telling my little brother like several times. I'd like drive him places before he had his own car.
Yeah,
they'd be like, you know what? Like if war broke out and they drafted me, like I would go.
Mm-hmm. And you don't really have a choice at that point.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it'd be like I wouldn't try to draft dodge because I felt like it was my duty. I felt like it was my duty to my country.
Sure, the
exact same things that they said. It's like I would feel like when I was that young, maybe not so much now, but I still think that if it came to like defending the country, I would be like, yep. Like
where
sign
do
me
I
up.
sign?
Like
Fair enough.
I might get killed, but I feel in my heart that's the right thing to do.
Fair enough. But that's also you speaking as a 24-year-old man.
Yes.
Where I think of myself, and you guys chime in if you have thoughts on this, but when I was 15, okay, so when I was a very little kid, I thought the Army, being a soldier, was the coolest shit in the world, right?
Yeah.
You're the hero. You're G.I. Joe.
Yep.
You know, you're crawling through the dirt and you're tough and my one of my favorite movies of all time was First Blood with Sylvester Stallone, and he was a veteran, and he, was so tough and cool. And when I watch that movie now, I go, man, he was dealing with some serious PTSD. And, but anyway, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. My older brother, Brian, he's an Army veteran. He retired from the Army, and he used to give me some of his old fatigues when he Brian, if you're listening, this is not a slight on you, but he's a very short, small man. So they fit me. They were big, but we as kids we could wear them, and I loved it. I think at Halloween for 10 years in a row, I was a soldier, right? But then when I got into my teens, I was like, no, hell no. There's no way I wanted anything to do with that. And then I get out of high school and I'm like, I would never serve in the military. I would never do this. That is not me. I have no interest in doing this. And then I turned 22 and I joined the military. So, but when I was 15, I would have been hard pressed to want to go sign up for that, especially if I knew I wasn't signing up to go get college or to go use the GI Bill or to go sail on a ship or to go join the Air Force or something like that. No, I'm signing up to get thrown in the mud with a rifle in my hand and get shot at.
Dude,
right?
I can say right now,
is crazy.
Even with the patriotism stuff, had I gotten drafted, no matter how patriotism, I would have never signed up for the Army. Ever. And had I been drafted, I probably would have been scared out of my goddamn mind. because I know exactly what would happen. I would join the Army. And the beginning scene of Saving Private Ryan where the doors open on the landing boats and all of them just get shot immediately.
That's you?
That's me. It's I would die instantly.
Oh, come on, Connor.
I don't know. I got bad luck. But I died serving my country.
All right. So I like the story. We spoke on it a little bit. I like the story of the guy who was issued a kilt to wear with no underpants. He got a note that declared that he had not been issued underpants, so they couldn't give him a hard time about that. And then he had to ride at the bottom of any tram car, which I thought was pretty funny. Nick, what stood out to you about the boot camp phase of this? When they got into, they said, okay, we're past all the point where everyone's so young and they're getting signed up and they make it onto the bus and they go to boot camp. I don't know what they called it. They just called it training or something like that.
Training.
But basic training and, boot camp. What did anything stand out to you about boot camp for this crew?
Oh, probably a couple things. That apparently polishing your buttons is the most important thing in the world. But then
that so many times.
Yeah, but they didn't give them a way to do it, so they used their toothbrush to do that instead of brush their teeth, which is probably why the British have such horrible teeth.
Shots fired.
I'm sorry to any of our listeners over in the UK.
We do have some too. Yeah.
But great buttons.
That's
great
right.
buttons.
You guys have awesome buttons.
Amazing riflemen.
You have great buttons.
And then the other thing was probably their ration of the apple plum jam that they so love.
I only can put 4 sound clips because my little sound clip thing only has 4 buttons on it, my little soundboard. I had started to put the apple plum song, the jam song on there. I thought that was kind of funny.
That was pretty cool.
That song is Oh, It's a Lovely War. I
sing it for us, please.
It's oh, it's a lovely war. What would we want with eggs and ham when we've got plum and apple jam? Form 4's right turn. How will we spend the money we earn? Oh, it's a lovely war.
I love that so much.
Hey.
You're the man, Connor.
Thank you. I used to have when I had my iPod, I used to have like I think like 4 separate World War I songs.
Yeah.
I had that. Oh, It's a Lovely War. Over There, which is like the only American World War I song, and it's a banger.
That shit slaps,
dude. It is so good. I had It's a Long Way to Tipperary, and which is another famous British one, and then Are We Downhearted, which is also another British one.
Yeah.
So
they talk about boot camp, and they talk about how they learned to become soldiers. Most of these kids had never fired a gun. They'd never done anything like this. Not unlike boot camp now, it seemed a little less organized than maybe what my experience was. Of course, this was wartime. They were trying to get people ready to go, maybe having people that weren't, career drill instructors instructing. The boots hurt when they marched. Of course, that hasn't changed. My feet hurt all through boot camp. But what did change is that we didn't piss on our boots to make them more pliable, which to me, the use of like piss and stuff like that in this time was like, did your guys' sense of smell not work? Because good Lord, that couldn't have smelled good.
I mean,
if you're about to tell me that it might have smelled good.
No.
All right.
First of all,
you got to pay extra for that.
There's websites for that, I'm sure.
Yeah. But like, I can at least defend it when they were in the trenches.
That's
like,
different.
Yeah. Like we're talking about. I pissed
camp.
on my mask. And in fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, and if I'm wrong, I know there is one like expert historian who probably listens to this show.
Doubtful.
And they'll type up like a 30-page document about why I'm wrong.
Find me that Connor Hoins kid.
But if I remember correctly, I believe it was the Canadians who first came up with the idea: if you didn't have a gas mask, piss in a rag and put it over your mouth. And that was to protect you from, and I believe they were the first.
Could you just
to really
dump water on it?
What?
Could you just dump water on it?
No, because I think it has to do with something like
the ammonia.
Yeah, with like the ammonia that protects you from the gas. So it's
gross. It's gross.
It is disgusting.
I mean, it's better than dying from the gas.
From mustard gas.
Or
yeah.
they were flinging jellyfish, so the piss helped with that too.
Because the jellyfish stings and you got to pee on it. I get it. I'm surprised Brice didn't laugh harder at that.
I was like, where would they get all the jellyfish?
So weapons training was interesting. Some of the guys had never fired a rifle, like I said. Talk to me about the Mad Minute. What was the Mad Minute? You really remember that?
Yes. That's where they would essentially load 10 shots into the rifle, and they'd have to fire off 10 shots in a minute.
As quickly as possible.
Yep. I believe that was a thing during World War II as well, because they mentioned that like even though Americans had the M1 Garand and it was semi-automatic, that the British could fire almost as fast with their bolt actions because they had been trained to do that.
Yeah. So they learned to bayonet, which was going to come in handy later, which is pretty gruesome. At this point, though, they're still boys, still eager to fight the Germans. They were all talking about, we didn't want the war to be over by the time we got over there. They were afraid that we would already have won the war before I ever had a chance to get there. For my glory, I just wanted to fight Germans is one of the quotes. I didn't care where we had to go to do that. So they went to France. At first, things seem kind of beautiful as they arrive in France. They're talking about fields of crops that they raided and ate, parsnips and carrots and shit like that. Beautiful landscape. But they get closer, and what do they start to see? So they, Brice, they've got guys walking the other direction.
Yeah.
Talk to me about those guys.
How is it up there? It's bloody awful.
Yeah, it's bloody awful. The faces of the ones coming back are not as fresh and as happy seeming as the ones coming from boot camp.
Yeah.
Towns. What about Connor? Tell me about the towns that they're coming past.
Just totally ruined. I mean, just shelled the shit. World War I is a war of artillery.
Right.
It just shelled the shit out.
Shell holes everywhere. Totally destroyed, totally razed. This is the first point in the film where we get a full screen. They zoom in, they turn this into full screen.
That was an awesome transition.
Yeah, they colorize it. They go, okay, now the war begins. We've found the boys. We trained them up. We got them to France. Now our story starts. They take us to the front lines. There's no more time to prepare. You put 1 in the chamber, 9 in the magazine, and you get ready to fire it immediately. There's no, we got to get up to the front lines. We get to sit. We get to plan. We get to do it. No, you're walking, and you're going to start shooting and be shot at immediately. Mm-hmm. That's a crazy thought. If I was thinking that when I went to my first duty station after my training, like, I don't get to, find my bed. I don't get to unload my sea bag. I don't get to, find where I'm going to be working and kind of lay of the land sort of thing. Get the weekend off before you go to work on the morning. No, I'm going, and I got to immediately hit the dirt and start shooting. That's crazy, man. And to think where you're going to be at is in the trenches. Nick, the trenches, man.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
What a scary, filthy, decrepit, awful place.
But that becomes your sanctuary too. Because the only thing keeping you alive is
that
this
damn trench.
Disgusting hole in the ground.
And I apologize. I'm interjecting so much, but I'm so passionate.
Connor?
But
no apologies needed, my friend.
I want to state this now to all listeners who do not know that the Allied trenches, our side, assuming everyone listening to this is from like the United States or Britain.
They're not.
Well,
here's
the
something
Allies.
4% of our listeners are from Germany.
Oh, so the Allies.
So
the German listeners are going to be happy to know this. The Allied trenches were so much worse than the Central Power. So the Allied British side were so much worse than the Central Power, the German side trenches. The German trenches compared to the Allied trenches were pristine, and they were still disgusting.
Yeah. So they talked about, Nick, you want to go into some of the things they talked about about the world of the trenches and kind of what, do you remember kind of how they described those?
Yeah. I mean, I just remember talking about just how filthy there's standing water in the bottom of them.
So gross.
There's fleas. Their uniforms are getting
lice.
Lice. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Lice.
Yeah.
They're getting lice infested.
Yeah.
The only way they can drink any water is basically they had these little cutouts in the trench that they could boil water and make their tea out of basically the trench water.
The machine gun water.
Right.
They had the Vickers machine gun.
It heated the water.
And it heated the water up, and then they used it for tea. They're like, oh, it only tastes a little like petrol, but it was all right. Like, oh my God. So they were talking about the trenches being a maze.
Yes.
There were signs that said, death that way, and the shitting pole is that way. You keep your head down. It was a traverse system, which was basically meant it was zigzagged so that it was a little harder for it to be targeted, I think.
If they had explosions, then the fire would hit a wall and stop.
Oh, fair enough.
Really?
Engineering at
they
its
kind of
finest.
explained that just a little bit. They didn't go into depth, but that is the reason you drop a bomb a bomb hits in the trench, it's going to hit a wall and stop and not just keep going down the trench.
Not just use a straight like fire shoot to get everyone.
Correct.
Yeah. Communication lines going forward and back so that the guys running the wires and that could bring information from the front to the back trenches and whatnot. You get there for the first time, you're looking at this razor wire and there's bodies strewn all in it. And you have to kind of be like, oh, well, that's my new normal. Like, what the hell? Making food was difficult. You didn't want to show smoke to the Germans because then they know where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's fire, there's somebody probably cooking some food. So that's where we're going to target our bombs. So they cut out little holes in the side and try to make, they had ways of heating their food so that it would not make a bunch of smoke. It was just, it was awful. They would rotate who was sleeping, who was watching, and who was working. And you'd sleep kind of in a hole dug in the side of the trench and try to stay as dry as possible.
it feels so much, hearing the personal testimonies, it feels so much more disorganized than it would if you were like listening to like a actual like a typical war documentary.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a good
feels
point.
disorganized.
Yeah. And I'll bet you it felt like it to them. They probably got there and went, oh, we just have to do this. There's no, you know, when I was in the military, and that's what, I'm sorry I keep going back to it, but I can only,
It's
you know.
it's a good frame of
reference.
reference.
Yeah.
Modern military and not the Army. I was in the Navy, so it's always a different story. But, you know, everything for the first, you know, several months of my existence, I knew exactly what I was supposed to be doing, and I knew what would happen if I didn't do it, right? Like, to the T, I knew exactly, you know, it's very regimented, which when you think military, like you said, Connor, that's kind of what you think. And sure, there was some of that here, but like you said, if you're put into that and you're like, okay, yeah, you've got your sergeants, your corporals, whatever you have to listen to, but they're not telling you like, this is how you make your food necessarily. Like, if you're hungry, eat, you better figure it out, you know, and you've got the other guys probably telling you, this is what worked for me. And like, good luck. Like, oh my gosh. So if this all doesn't sound bad enough, Brice, tell us what they had to do to take a dump. Private Necker.
Yeah, so one of the finer restroom facilities that they had was a pole just laid over, and you'd be sitting there next to 5 other guys,
shoulder to shoulder, cheek to cheek,
bare cheeks, just pooping into a giant hole.
It is a little bit disturbing how many photos they have of literally exactly what you described.
Yeah.
That just kind of, it's like, who was doing this?
Who was taking those photos? And I got to imagine, though, that, I mean, we saw some of the jovial side of those soldiers. I got to imagine it was funny to them. Poop jokes have always been funny.
Always been funny.
Always
you know,
when you're getting shot at, I can only imagine that going and taking a shit next to your mate is probably one of the better parts of your day.
Yeah. You're not wrong. That's crazy. My favorite story, though, is that where you're going?
No, go on.
My favorite story is when one of the poles broke.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they talked about the, you know, falling into the stream of whatever was behind.
Sitting on that fell down into the muck.
And they had to get their rifles to pull them out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
people up
dude.
top were
Can
reaching
you even
their rifles
imagine?
down.
I mean, that's not even the most horrific part. I mean, I'd rather go fall in the poo than get shot and whatnot. But good Lord, that's not cool.
You fell in the poo and you have one uniform and it's already lice ridden.
Right. Yep. And so that's a good segue to talk. Were you going to somewhere else there, Brice?
I was just going to say, you know, they're a bunch of 15-year-olds, so poop jokes are always funny.
Oh, they're even funnier. Yeah. You're right.
No way to shower or anything after falling in.
Yeah. And they probably wouldn't have anyway. 15, you don't shower,
That's
do you?
true. That's
right. So speaking about all of that, let's talk about the hygiene in the trenches. Dysentery became prevalent, just like in the Oregon Trail.
Yep. Shitting yourself.
This is spread through contaminated food or water, usually, which I'm sure there was plenty of contaminated food and water. Results in severe and bloody diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramps, fever, and malaise. I don't know what that is, but if it isn't bad enough what you're going through, you're dealing with bloody diarrhea and cramping and, you know, abdominal pains and fevers. Like, God, if this doesn't sound like the worst hell that I can imagine, it's definitely up there with it. And then we're also dealing with lice.
Yeah.
That was so gross.
And rats. Don't forget the rats.
Yep.
And rats.
Rats.
So the lice, though, for some reason got me. That was what made me feel like I started to get a little bit, because they were like showing them these little lobsters basically that are eating at you, and they're like trying to burn them out of the seams of their clothes, and they're like hearing the little eggs pop and whatnot, and you're like, ooh, I'm getting them, you know. And then just to know if you miss one, you're gonna have an infestation again. So they never talked about these things though. Like they're as bad as I'm sure they really were. It was kind of interesting to me the way that they sort of just nonchalantly spoke about lice and and rats. I mean, did you notice that too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a coping mechanism?
Oh yeah. For sure.
It was just very matter of fact, like,
and there was lice.
And there was lice.
There was a lot of rats. Wherever there's a grave or a body, there's rats, and they're fat and healthy because they were feeding on the dead, which is, awful. They said they'd shoot them, and they just kept on coming. Okay, so the living conditions aren't great. The hygiene is awful. Let's talk a little bit about the mental strain these guys went through. They talked about knowing you could be shelled at any minute. I mean, that's got to be rough. You'd hear the gun go off, the big boom of the gun, and your brain would go through all kinds of different psychological stages before it hit because you just never knew. You'd see your friends torn to bits. I mean, you want to talk about PTSD before they even knew what PTSD was, right?
It was just shell shock back
then.
then.
Yeah. What were you saying?
Oh, I was going to say what Connor was saying. I believe the term shell shock was coined during this time.
I think you're right. And I think we were even watching in some of those where you could see hands shaking, and I'm like, oh, dude, I feel so bad for these guys. It was described that the bullets coming whistling down like the hobs of hell, and then the gas. Phosphine gas.
So I have taken in some large whiffs of phosgene gas because it's in refrigerants, and I've attempted to solder piping that still had some refrigerant gases in it. So and I'm sure that's a small dose compared to what they were getting, and it's to the point you think you're gonna die. I mean, your lungs burn, your eyes burn, you just hack. It's not good. So I can only imagine what those guys went through.
Yeah, and phosphine gas kind of, from what I understand, sort of turned into mustard gas, causing blistering of the skin and mucous membranes on contact. I know I've done they called it in boot camp, they called it the gas chamber, but it's basically tear gas, where you have to experience it and all that. And you start off with your gas mask on, and then you take it off, and then you have to sit there and, catch your snot while you're saying your name and all that, because you're just, everything out of your face is draining into your hands, and it's awful. And that's not even a fraction of how awful, because I knew I wasn't going to die.
Right.
This was just going to make me cough and sneeze and burn and hurt.
And if I remember correctly, again, sorry, but that's
the last apology you get for this episode. You don't get to apologize.
Right, then I won't apologize. I'll do it unabashedly. If I remember correctly, mustard gas eventually evolved to chlorine gas, which was even worse. And I don't think they even mentioned it here.
They did not.
No, they didn't. Anything else about the, just the conditions of the Western Front that you want to talk about before we get?
Yeah, they also talked about those exploding shrapnel bombs that they would explode them overhead, and then they'd get shrapnel rain down on them as well. So, just add that to the list.
Yeah, it's I can't say it anymore that the way that these guys just so nonchalantly talked about some of the most horrific conditions that I've probably ever heard of. It's just a crazy sort of, I don't know. I don't know. To hear someone talk about it so nonchalant is just wild.
It's unbelievable.
It really is.
We had a job to do, so we just got on with it.
Yeah.
It's like, man. And no man's land. We talked about they're catching water from. It's like, can you imagine how many dead soldiers, dead horses that water they're catching comes from?
It's why they all got dysentery from it. Probably,
it's like,
they're
like, well, boil the green stuff off the top. It's like,
yeah,
I'm sure that'll do
it. One thing that we didn't talk about that they talked about was the smell of the front line. So let's listen to them describe the smell of the front line.
Over the whole of the front line, there was a smell. It wasn't a complicated smell. There was the smell of decaying corpses.
Nasty, sickly smell. You never forgot that smell.
It was the smell of death. If you've ever smelled a dead mouse, it was like that, but hundreds and hundreds of times worse.
Seemed to cling to everything when you was having your food. You could taste it.
The awful stench and bits of human bodies lying about. It became an everyday thing. You thought, well, it'll be your turn next. What does it matter?
You're smelling the dead all around you, and you're saying, well, you kind of get used to it because I'm probably next, and what does it matter? Is it just me, or does that dude sound like Winnie the Pooh? Did anyone else get that?
Yeah, a little bit. Now that you mention it, I didn't notice that the first time.
Can you do your impression, Brice?
Not with the pressure on.
Oh, come on!
I did it earlier.
Yeah.
Y'all missed.
Oh, bother!
not terrible. Yeah. All that, and then it starts getting colder. That's just adds to the wonderland that was the Western Front in World War I.
One thing you mentioned getting colder. I'm surprised they didn't mention was the Christmas truce.
Oh yeah,
I'm surprised that they did not mention that.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. That's when they decided we're going to stop shooting for Christmas,
and they got out of the trench and went and met with each other. They played soccer, gave each other candy.
Do you think there was anyone in that group that was like as they were doing, they're just kind of like just a little jab, and they're like, I know I'm going to want to do that later. Probably not.
I think the hardest part for me would be I go over and I'm like, hey, let's be bygones, and then immediately the next day I have to go back to shooting him. And
right?
It's like,
yeah, that dude was cool.
He was nice, and now he's dead.
Yeah. As if you think things can't get worse. Oh, it does, because it only got colder and it only got wetter. What sort of things did the wetness and the coldness bring them there, Nick, when your big book of notes?
I do have this in here. Oh, I'm on the wrong page, but I believe it was frostbite and gangrene.
Yeah, trench foot. Talk to me about that, guys. Anyone, come on, talk to me about what exactly trench foot is.
Basically, it's your foot rotting off.
While you're alive.
And the pictures of it.
Oh, the pictures were awful.
Their skin is just black.
Yeah.
Like just. Ooh.
Yeah, it's gross. Basically, a breakdown of the tissues in their feet from being so cold and wet, turning gangrenous, caused the foot to need to be removed. And I'm sure that wasn't a pleasant experience because it's not. Yeah, they had doctors, but there was nothing sanitary about that living condition. Can you imagine having to get your foot amputated? Not because it got, you didn't lose your foot because it got blown off or something. You lost it because you sat in a wet, cold boot for too long. Oh my God, dude. That is just,
I mean, where else are you going to go?
Yeah. It's true. It's true, but my God.
So, I did have one thought. This is kind of, it wasn't stated in the movie, but they talked about having so many young boys, in the service, and I kind of wondered a little bit if it's like, yeah, we want all these really young kids because they will never question anything.
Oh, I'm sure
they're just going to follow orders, and you start getting guys that are 23, 24, 25 that start being able to think for themselves a little bit more. That's
how
probably
much are they
not
going
as
to be
ideal.
willing to put up with. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Let's keep talking about how awful things are. The next thing during this time, since it's cold and wet, is the fucking mud, right? It's like a death sentence just to step off the duck boards and see people going off the boards. And it's like, well, there goes fucking Jim. Like, he's not getting back out of that. It's so thick and like the sucking mud that you literally can't get out of and you can't pull someone out of. That's terrifying, man. So that's just how awful things were. I'm sure that really only kind of scratches the surface of, what they went through. So we could talk a little bit about trench raids. They'd cut a passage through the wire at night quietly. They'd want to stay as quiet as possible and use knives and bayonets. They'd bring their bombs and guns as well. If they came across a German, they'd pull a straight up act of killing and use a garrote on him or a knife and just bayonet him as hard as they could, which, you know, the raids were the first time these soldiers actually met the Germans. You know, Connor, you talked about the Christmas truce or whatever it was called. You know, they go through all this shit and then, you know, they're seeing the Germans for the first time. We've already lost a bunch of our brothers, right, and now we're finally seeing the Germans. And guess what? They're not little devils on the other side of that trench.
They're us.
They're us. They're people. They have families. You know, to kind of bring some levity to all this, they go through all this. They're dealing with the most gruesome killings, the worst living conditions, the worst food, the worst hygiene, everything. And then poof, they get relieved. That was the weirdest part of this documentary is they got relieved. They did a stretch on the front and then they get to go back to the rear.
Yeah, I think they were trying to demonstrate basically the cycles of the war, but yeah.
For sure. Mm-hmm. You know, I thought here, let's just, before we talk about it, let's get into, let's listen to this.
The things which always struck me as being absolutely stupid was that the next morning, every man had to be spick and span, not a trace of mud on him.
You'd brush your clothes or dry them off the best way you could and clean your boots. In other words, smarten yourself up.
The men would always appear the same, cheerful under the circumstances, happy as they could be, and making the best of everything, you know, in true British fashion.
What? The Cockney wit was prevalent, and we were all lads together, you know. We didn't care about it. We'd make a fuss about nothing, the little things that didn't matter really, because it was something to fill the time in.
We used to have to make our own amusements.
We laughed at the slightest things. I think probably it was the general tension of the atmosphere that used to make us like that, you know.
Yeah, so to me it was crazy. It was absurd. You know, we heard them joking, playing their flutes and laughing and, you know, drinking and shaving and cleaning. So to go back to the beginning of that clip, you know, we didn't talk about it, but they had talked about when they're on the front lines, you got people out of uniform, they're messy, they're not shaved, you know, but as soon as you get back on rest, you're expected to be spick and span. Yeah.
Well, yeah. General come, you got to look for the general.
That's right. The guy on the back, you know.
The guy who's not doing any fighting.
Right. Yeah. So that was wild to me, but talk about their time at the rear. I mean, what did you guys think when this was happening? Did this strike you as odd as I was feeling?
It felt very odd to me.
Yeah.
Because, like, they just went through hell and now they're on holiday.
Yeah.
They're taking baths. They're drunk the entire time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can understand that.
They're visiting naked French ladies. And...
Yeah. Yep. Now the brothels and the gambling, that's something I can maybe understand.
I was waiting for that to happen.
Yeah. If it's me now, you know, I don't partake in that kind of activity. However, if I'm 17 years old, I'm seeing that type of grotesquerie on the front lines all around me. I'm going through shit and I'm pretty damn sure that I'm not getting out of here alive. You see a pretty French lady and she's offering it up for a few shillings or whatever. You're like, guess what?
Let's go, baby.
Yeah. I hate
I'm gonna be dead tomorrow, so.
Right. Yep. So anyway, there's break time. You know, that's the break. And then before they know it, it's right back to war, boys. And this time, however, they have orders anything else stand out to you guys before we go forward about their break, their rest and relaxation? Anything we need to talk about on that? Are we feeling good?
Was the only mention in the film of colonial troops. They mentioned the British and they were the British. They mentioned
The Canadian.
Canada and the Anzac troops, Australia and New Zealand.
Oh.
Yeah.
With the gambling, if I remember correctly.
They were big gamblers.
They were big gamblers, and I think I think that's the only time they get mentioned.
Yeah.
I did think about my great granddad during that part, because apparently there was a letter that was sent to another relative that my uncle now has, where he talks about losing his virginity to a French woman. So.
Oh, did he pay for it, or was it consensual? Hopefully, I guess sex work is still consensual, but most of the time.
He claims she fell in love with him, so he's
Yeah.
So
I'm a soldier.
If he was alive and we'd ask him, I'd say that it was not a prostitute.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't know for sure.
So before we know it, the quote unquote break time is over. And it's back to war. By this time, boys, we have orders to go ahead with an operation to break through enemy lines. And at this time, we have a big secret weapon. What was that big secret weapon under the tarps? Connor?
What a reveal. The land ships, which was their official name, and tank was a code name that became the official name because everyone just called them tanks.
What I wonder what it was just a nickname for them, and it became
tanks was their code name because they mentioned they're like, we thought they were just tanks of water, and that was specifically why they were called that.
That's
their
interesting.
official name was originally land ships.
Did you know that, Nick?
I didn't. You learned me, Connor.
Yeah, boy. Trivia team, we got this next time. We're coming for you, sassy gals.
That's right. That's right. Quiz Lemon.
Wasted you.
Quiz Lemon.
Better.
Yeah. We'll have to tell them that they get the shout out.
They get a shout out.
Yeah. Shout out to Zach and everyone at Brewski's Pub Quiz on Wednesday nights. Tell us, Nick, Connor, and Brice, I guess, if you want, tell us a little bit how the tank changed the war.
Well, they could drive it through barbed wire. I think that helped quite a bit.
I think so.
Game changer.
That's a big game changer. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't hurt the horses like it does,
Yeah, that was a part that had occurred earlier in the documentary, but that was kind of sad for me, was hearing about all the horses that were killed in action.
Well, yeah,
it's watch War Horse.
It's
so sad.
No, but I've heard of that.
Yes, it's very good.
Motorized transports and stuff weren't common yet, so they didn't have like Jeeps. I mean, they did have like cars and stuff like that, but most of the stuff was pulled by horse-drawn carriage or like these weird like trains. Like, I'd never heard of these. Where it was like these light engines where they would lay down railroad tracks and these tiny little trains would bring stuff.
It was wild, man.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that.
Me neither.
And they had to switch from steam to petrol engines because of the
smoke. Yeah.
Like,
oh, that's giving away our location.
Right. How do they know where our train is every time?
Smoke's billowing out.
Yeah.
But yeah, when they got to that stage, I was like, I could almost really relate to that because it just felt like a work site.
It did. Yeah, it really did. So the boys get into position. They get as close to the German lines as they can with bayonets fixed and rifles loaded. And they sit. They sync their watches and they sit. They wait and they sit and they wait and they wait and they wait. And this is the first time that any of the men in this film talked about feeling anxiety, talked about feeling fear, the waiting. They're giving their personal belongings to their officers because they're not expected to come back. They're thinking, this is the end. The man standing next to you is your best friend, even if you don't even know him. These men weren't afraid of dying. In fact, and some would even say that would have been a mercy in some ways, losing an arm or a leg or being left alive. Now that to them was scary. They even mentioned it wasn't the dying that scared me. It was getting my arm blown off that scared me. And they sit and they wait. They exchange dirty stories to keep their spirits high, as I think is common among, men of any ilk, especially in times of distress.
Sure.
And this is when I was noticing the shaking hands and the falling out from shell shock and bombings now. And then the time comes to go over that line and to take on the Germans. And this is kind of what we get.
And then zero.
Somebody shouted, "There they go!" To the left were the London Scottish running forward.
I gave the order up the ladders, over the top.
After this, we lived in a world of noise, simple noise, for hours.
As soon as you get over the top, fear has left you.
We didn't run. There was no shouting, no cheering. Everybody was deadly quiet.
Just as I stepped into no man's land, somebody was shot through the head and his skull was splintered. It wasn't a good send-off, I can assure you.
Barrage proceeded into the enemy lines in steps of 100 yards at a time.
A line of British troops with fixed bayonets walking quite steadily behind the barrage. It was a sight I should never forget.
To start with, we'd had the odd machine gun firing, but remarkably little, and it seemed almost too good to be true.
And we then realized that the Germans had been retaining their fire until they saw how far the attack was developing.
Unknown to us, there was 10 to 20 German machine guns.
Then all hell broke loose.
And my God, he really opened up, and he let us have it. He just swept us.
Wow. I mean, that was what you had talked about earlier about, old school tactics meet modern warfare. Because if you couldn't hear it in that clip, they talk, one of the things that they talk about anyway is when they come over the hill and they just start walking silently, and they start walking and they're going, we're not getting a whole lot of machine gun fire.
I think we got them.
This is kind of nice. Well, the German, 10 to 12 machine guns or whatever he said, he's just waiting to see how close we get. Oh, time to open up, and they start cutting them down. And that goes into some of the most powerful footage in this documentary, in my opinion. Thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost sensory overload from the footage and the sound of all the machine guns and bombs going off overhead.
Yep.
And then, and then hearing these guys talk. I mean, it was the way that those clips of them talking got put together. Almost, it was like a frenzy.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
I was very impressed with that part of the film from that standpoint.
Yep. And, one of the things he mentioned in that clip we just listened to was the overwhelming noise, which, I think Peter Jackson and his crew did a pretty good job of portraying that, and the footage that I was talking about, they went through a good couple minutes where they show a soldier smiling kind of in slow motion. And then they'd cut to a scene of what we have to assume is that same soldier, or at least that's how they portrayed it, dead and bloody laying in the mud.
Yeah. So one of the things is these are all hand crank film cameras, and getting shots of war in the trenches and stuff wasn't readily available.
Right.
So they had just a couple of shots of guys running across, bombs exploding. So they had to get a little bit creative with how they portrayed it. And I think showing the faces of all these characters that we had already seen in the movie, kind of helped us realize just how brutal this war was, because all these characters are dead.
Yeah, we're seeing them laying in the mud.
I will also say, in addition to that, which I thought was also incredibly powerful, the use of essentially these drawings, which I can only assume were made by soldiers post-war, of their experiences of trench warfare, of guys beating each other to death with clubs. I mean, that's how it was in the trench. You get so close and you get this bat that's got barbed wire around it.
Yeah, and they talked about, how they almost didn't notice the men falling around them. They just had to keep going.
Yeah.
And almost, if not all of them, were getting shot.
Yes.
They talked about getting shot.
Yes, I had that written in my notes about is like a number of the interviewees said, well, I got shot.
Yeah.
Like, once again, so matter of fact.
Yeah, I got shot. I didn't feel pain. It was just a thump of the bullet and then the blood. The pain didn't come until later. The first waves of these guys who went over were completely wiped out, dead or wounded, completely. Indescribable carnage and noise. Tanks were plowing right over dead bodies. You know what I mean? They didn't have time to move those men, they said. They're like, we don't have time or the energy or the people to do this. I mean, we can't go pay respects to the dead right now. We're getting shot at. We're going to be cut down. But forward they pushed into the German lines, into the German trenches, using their rapid fire techniques that they learned in boot camp, the 10, what was it? The minute.
The hot minute.
Hot minute. And they're shooting anything that moved. They said there was only one way to bayonet, and that was to shove as hard as you could right into the person. Like, there was no, pussyfooting around this. Like, no, you push it, and you push it as hard as you fucking can. Some prisoners were taken. Other people were just shot, depending on who they came across. Then the shooting stopped, and they had to start caring for their wounded, which the heat of the action is one type of fear and disorganized and, but, to me, once the shooting stops and we have to deal with what's left behind, that's where it gets real scary. That's where, in my opinion, the real trauma sets in, because now you're thinking about everything that just happened. You're seeing you're having time to focus on what just happened all around you. And now you have to try to help or be helped or call for help.
Who was the guy you mentioned? And this was one of the guys where you could tell he starts breaking down. I actually watched it with the subtitles on, and there's a subtitle where he sobs, where essentially a soldier was blown almost like entirely to shreds. Like he was missing like an arm and a leg, and like it was clear that he was in immense amount of pain. And his buddy pulled out his pistol and just shot him, and was like, I did what I had to do.
I would have wanted him.
It was
to do
mercy.
The same. Yeah,
it was mercy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wrote that down as basically my standout moment.
Yeah,
he says he shot him. He said his exact words was, "I had to, but it hurt me badly."
Yeah, I'll bet you until the day he died that hurt
he
him.
Thought about that. Yeah,
a very human part that they talked about was the German soldiers they had taken prisoner.
Yes.
Talk to me about what was so special about that. What did they find with these German prisoners that they had taken?
Well, one thing that they mentioned was that, they were assisting them and helping them with the injured and the dead.
Yeah.
I mean, just right away.
Yeah.
I do remember, and it might have been from a different part of that. It's just something I noticed. They talked about a lot of the Germans that they were dealing with were Bavarians, and he said, "Yeah, the Bavarians they're just great guys."
Yeah,
he goes, they weren't bad like the Prussians.
Everyone hated the Prussians,
and I found that to be like so. Not to make light of this part because it was very serious, but I found it interesting, and part of the history behind that is Germany didn't become Germany as a country until about 30 years before that.
Oh yeah,
it was
super
babies.
recent.
Yeah, so they were Prussia was a region, Bavaria was a region.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and to speak to that, the part that just struck me so crazy or special or whatever you want to say was the amount of respect they had for these prisoners.
Yes.
The same guys that could have just been shredding you and that you were just shredding minutes before, they were just kids too. They had families. They were hard workers. They, like Nick said, they helped move the wounded. None of the soldiers said that they felt vengeful towards them. They felt sympathy toward them. They're humans.
I wonder if that was because the British didn't feel the same ire towards the Germans that the French did. I'm willing to bet that French prisoners to the Germans or German prisoners to the French were
treated much differently.
Fair
enough. Yep. Then on November 11th at 11 o'clock in the morning, what do we get, Connor?
The truce.
The truce. An armistice was met and hostilities will cease on the Western Front. And all of a sudden, it's all quiet on the Western Front, right?
In the West, nothing new.
Nice tie-in.
Thank you very much. The feeling of being able to stand up without worrying about being shot, relief they talked about, no celebration. The feeling was basically what? What do we do now?
We're done. Like,
yeah,
pack it up, boys.
Yeah. What now? We just went through hell. What do we do now?
You get up over the trench. The guys are like, oh, hey, good game. Good game.
Yep.
It was a good game. We did it.
And that's something that I'm really glad they went into in this documentary was how the soldiers felt after the war, after they went home. They were happy to leave. They were exhausted, but they had no idea what to do. Mental health and mental help wasn't available. I mean, that wasn't even something that had barely even been thought about.
The thing when the soldier is talking to his father, he's like, I would talk to my father, and my father would be like, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Like, so assuredly, he'd be like, how would you know?
What
you weren't even there.
Yeah. Yeah. And these guys had trouble getting jobs. They were considered, like what Connor mentioned earlier, ex-servicemen became, it meant a liability, a nuisance. These guys were fitted with suits and said, good luck. And like you said too, Connor, speaking to civilians felt like a waste of time because they didn't understand. No one understood unless they were, a comrade, which, I was in the military for 5 years, right? I've been out of the military a lot longer than I was in the military. But the friends that I made in there are some of my best friends, my closest, the ones I care the most deeply about. And there's something about going through something hard with people that just creates a bond that no one else understands. And it's just it not to take anything away from those other friendships or anything, but those people just get something about you on a deeper level. So, I understand when I hear these guys saying, I couldn't talk to a civilian. It just felt like a waste of my time because you didn't know what it was like. You didn't understand. You're talking to me and you're asking me, things like what everyone, did you kill anybody? Like,
yeah,
dude, you're going to fucking ask me that? Like, you don't know what it is to ask me that.
Well, and it was they were so disrespectful. Like, just no, I mean, like,
right.
I get like the whole, like some people don't like the thank you for your service stuff, but it's like, come on, man. Like,
I think most people do like that.
I would hope so. I would hope so.
I think if you're the thank yous, they go a long way.
But it's man, it's like just no respect for these guys.
Right. My favorite, or I guess my least favorite quote was, I think it was the very final quote of the movie. When one of the guys was asked by one of his coworkers after he got home, and he said, "Where have you been? Were you on nights?"
Yeah.
Like, what, dude?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you thought. That's how much thought.
Where you thought I was.
That's what you thought about this. Like, that was just astonishing to me. Standouts, guys. Open up to the whole show. We're at the end. That's the end of our of my timeline through the documentary. What stood out to you? If we didn't talk about it, now's your chance. Let's discuss it. Brice?
For me, it would be moments where it's just a shot of the guys in the trench. One of them sleeping and they're waking him up, and we hear the voices go, "We're in the movies,"
Yeah.
or "We're in the pictures."
The picture show.
And you see the guy like wake up and start to smile and everything, and it's like these guys are in the front lines, like surrounded by hell, and yet like it's such like a boys club where they're just having fun moments.
Yeah.
And just
find the moments where you can, whether it's the shit joke, whether it's the guy running the picture film, and whatever it may be.
Doesn't matter how bad the job gets, they do the job, and then there's these moments in between where it's like
it's the only way you can maintain any sense of sanity.
There was a surprising amount of shots that featured a soldier just absolutely biffing it, like falling on his face, and then they get up and they'd be like, imagine that being recorded for 100 years.
Yeah, and you're like,
oh,
there's my grandpa.
There he is.
What about you, Nick? Anything in your big old book of notes that stood out to you that you wanted to go over at all?
Well, originally I had mentioned the soldier that had to kill the other soldier that had been blown to bits. But we've talked about that. So another moment that I thought was just really, it was one of the better cinematography moments, I thought, was when they very first showed that final charge. They showed that whole platoon, if you will, of the Scottish soldiers in their kilts running up the hill. That was one of the probably one of the more complete archival videos that was in the video. It was in this movie, and it was pretty neat.
Yeah,
you got the bagpipes playing in the background. That was
the
really
whistles blowing, and
that was a pretty cool scene.
Yeah, for sure. Credits roll, and we have to talk about our feelings. What did you feel, Connor? When this was over, what did you feel?
So I don't know if I said this at the start of the film, at the start of our review. Apologies.
Podcast, Talkumentary. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. But when I got done with the film, I thought it was very, very simple, but I was like, that was a really basic World War I documentary. But when I thought about that, it wasn't necessarily made for someone like me, and that it was focusing more on the human element, I was like, that was pretty good.
Yeah. Yep. Brice, feelings?
I felt good.
Made you feel good, huh?
Yeah, because it was a huge undertaking to get this footage and make it something we can watch today.
Yeah. True.
So I was just kind of thinking of that aspect, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Nick, how'd you feel, man?
So
you were a little disappointed, right?
No, well, yeah, I'll explain that. So the history buff in me, if you will, was a little bit disappointed on that there weren't points during the film where they gave you some context. Like, what battle were they in here? You know, just a couple simple things like that that I would have really enjoyed.
Could have gone a long way.
Yes.
I was gonna say I believe the battle was probably the Somme, if I remember correctly. But they never mentioned it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you guys could probably figure that out just from some context clues. But like, I agree. I think that some of that could have gone a long way, Nick.
But you're right. The cinematography was just fantastic. And then just how I felt at the end of it when they closed with, like, you know, them trying to go back to ordinary life. And it just felt like, you know, it almost felt like you hear from the Vietnam.
Yeah.
Vets. Like, it was very similar, like, of this, you know, the one soldier said something along the lines of talking, I think it was to his mom, and about what he went through. Is like, oh, why would you want to talk about such a terrible subject?
Yeah.
And
what else am I going to talk?
Right.
Yeah.
And that basically they had this feeling that, well, this was kind of a pointless war, you know?
Yep. Yeah.
And So yeah, it was. I definitely ended on a bit of a low note.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely felt like I went on a crazy ride with these guys, but I agree. It was, although I loved this film, I really thought it was great. I also, if we're talking feelings, was like, well, that's depressing. You go
Right.
through all that stuff. You want to come out, you talk about the propaganda of World War II and all that. And after World War II, we walk away the victors, and, the people get to hold their heads held high, and
They
the
come
villain
back
has
and
been
there's the
defeated
parades
and there's parades. But this one, you're going, was that pointless? Did all of my best friends just get torn apart, and I lost, whatever, and now I'm dealing with all this stuff, and I'm dealing with having trouble getting work, and I'm probably dealing with injuries, and and I'm lucky to be alive, and I'm guilty. I feel guilty for being alive when people aren't. And now we're talking about this. This might have been kind of pointless. Like, that sucks. That hits on a whole new level. And that was where I agree. I felt a little depressed after watching this. Like, and I think you'd be hard pressed not to feel some of that. One of the things, so I also like to talk about, was this well made? I think we've agreed that for what they had to work with, this was top notch.
Oh, beautiful.
Very beautiful. One of the things I think is crazy whenever I see this kind of old footage, when video cameras were a new thing and they weren't really understood, the footage has this eerie quality to it because these guys stare right at the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always this like ominous thing about it, because it seems like they're looking at me. They're looking right at me. Like, maybe we went back in time and we're this out of place, weird, strange 2023 modern man who's standing on their front lines, and they're looking at me like I'm some kind of weird alien. They're smiling. They're going, oh, this is cool. This is weird. This is different. But I feel like I'm intruding almost. Did anyone else get those kind of feelings, Brice?
So one of the things is, most of these men, or these boys, like, any experience they would have had with a camera would have been a still camera.
Yeah.
And pictures for that is like, you're in the studio, sit still for 10 seconds, stare right here.
Yeah.
So like, the concept of, okay, move and do things.
Do normal things was new.
Yeah. So
I think
good point.
And I agree. I think it has an eerie quality as well. But this is how I feel towards any kind of old photograph that are of like people that like aren't famous, where it's like we don't even know this guy's name, and but yet he's immortalized. Like, he will be around for like this is the image we have of him forever.
Yeah,
because they took a film of him, and he's long gone now. I mean, he's been dead for over 100 years.
Right.
And it's, I don't know, and every time, and it's not just World War I, but like you see pictures of like the 1800s, and it's that guy's dead, but he's immortalized because you got a photo of him.
And it's just wild, because especially in that, when we're seeing it colorized and modernized and with new sound, and it feels a little bit more, modern, just because they did the remastering. And I'm going, these guys are looking, like, so many of them are looking right into the camera. And to me, it almost feels wrong. It almost feels like I'm looking into something that I have no business looking into. It feels like I'm peering into their horrors, and I get this feeling like they're looking back at me and going, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. Go back to your time. And I know that maybe just me looking the way into it, but that's the feeling that I get. Like, this is my horror. This is my, and you're not supposed to be here. And maybe that's just me, but anyway.
No, I think that's a really interesting feeling you have.
Yeah.
I had never thought about it that way. That's yeah, dang.
Because how would we look at someone from the future that dropped in and is looking at our story? We'd probably be like,
what are you doing? Go back and live your own life.
Yeah, what are you doing here? Anyway, anything else we want to get to? We're past. We've gone long, but that's all right. You guys are fun to talk to. This was a fun documentary. Our episodes just continually get longer. I'm sure DJ loves that too.
Sorry, I went on so many rants, DJ.
No.
The war was supposed to be over by Christmas.
You're cut off. That was another.
Damn it!
Sorry.
Damn it!
Oh, there's the door. Bye,
All right,
Connor.
That's it.
All right. Anything else? You guys good? Should we rate this thing?
Let's hit it.
All right. Finally, after all this fighting, we've come to the time where we need to rate this documentary with an official documentary rating. Each crew member scores the documentary on a scale of 1 to 10 items, with 1 being as bad as a case of trench foot and 10 being as great as a can of Tickler's plum apple jam. The item that is used for scoring changes each week depending on the content of the documentary watched that week. This week, Brice, you want to tell us what we're going to be using as our rating item?
We're going to be using people in the poop pit.
Yes, we are. People in the poop pit. I like how you put a question mark on that. This week we'll be using people in the poop pit as our rating item. So let's start, I think, with Nick. Nick, how many people in the poop pit?
I have 7 people in the poop pit. I feel a little jerk store on this because I mean they went, like you said, so much work to remaster this footage and to make this film, and it probably deserves much more. But being the history guy, I just need my historical context.
This is based on your opinion and your opinion only. It is valid. It is good. You could give this 0, and I would only judge you a little bit. But 7 people in the poop pit over at Nick's side of the building. Connor, our other special guest, how many people in your poop pit?
7 as well. For a lot of the same reasons as Nick. I thought the film is beautifully done. For anyone who isn't like a super history World War I buff like I am, it'd easily be a 9 or a 10. But I had wished that maybe would have been cool if they had maybe some other points of view, like the Germans or the French.
Okay.
But I would highly recommend anyone, especially if you have been a person who's like, I don't like history, watch this film and you'll love it.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Brice, tell me how many people in the poop pit.
Oh man, there's 9 people in the poop pit.
9 people in the poop pit. You really like all those people in that pit.
Yeah.
Tell me why you gave this a 9.
Well, they had to invent new technology to make this possible. And it had to be very meticulously done because everything was shot in different frames. All the footage was warped, scratchy, and wouldn't line up. And they had to go through all of that just to watch it and then colorize it and turn it into a movie.
Yeah.
So
it's a cohesive story of some sort.
And I'm not being a huge history buff myself, kind of learned a lot about World War I.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Yeah, just from the views of the guys in it. So
so for me, people in the poop pit, I also gave it 9, which this is an interesting thing. We've got 2 history buffs in the room that gave it 7 people in the poop pit, and 2 self-proclaimed not history buffs.
Just 2 dudes.
2 dudes who think that this stuff is interesting, but don't consider ourselves buffs, giving this a 9. So Connor, I think you're absolutely right. Who this was made for was maybe the more casual history,
And I don't use that as a derogatory.
No, and believe me, it's not. There's a reason I like when you guys come to trivia night with us, because you guys know this stuff better than I do. But yeah, so I gave it 9 as well for the same reasons, Brice. Mostly, I think, because I had yet, and maybe they're out there, but I had not seen something that looked this good from that era that also told a story from what I want to hear. I don't care as much about the details of the battle and all that, even though I do find that interesting. I like the personal stories. I want to hear what people felt. That's why at this show, I always ask people, what did this make you feel? I want to know those things, right? So to me, this really spoke to me. So I gave it 9. So after averaging everyone's scores, the official Talkumentary rating for They Shall Not Grow Old is 8 people in the poop pit. That's almost like a broken log. And we all just fell right in. Pull me out with your rifle, gentlemen. You men have served Talkumentary bravely this evening, and you are now relieved of your duties. A very, very special thank you to Nick Dolan and Connor Hoins for joining us this evening. This was a great documentary. You guys are great people, so this is a win-win. Connor, thank you so much, man.
Pleasure to be here, Lieutenant.
Ooh, I got a promotion. Or maybe no, I was a captain before, so excuse
Pleasure
me.
to serve you, Captain. Sorry about that mistake.
Nick, man, you're the best.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoy it.
Keep on listening, man. We really appreciate your plays. If you ever feel like trying to talk to our fellow comrades into listening to this, it's almost like some of our friends don't even like care about our show or even want to promote us. I mean,
Connor, they got a good show.
I'm sure I'll be sure to listen to it.
All you got to do is listen. How long is your commute to work?
It's about 21 minutes.
21 minutes. That's half of a show.
I was gonna say, look, I do put on stuff when I'm on the drive there and back. So,
but 20 some. This is 33 episodes in, and you haven't even listened to one yet. So get on.
I will.
That's your mission, soldier.
Yes, sir.
As always, Brice, thanks for being here and imparting your endless amounts of wisdom to our listeners.
You're all most welcome.
I want you to know that I'd shit next to you all on a pole if that were necessary.
That's right.
Glad it isn't.
Glad it isn't.
Let's talk about next week's episode. For next week, we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day with a really awesome documentary called Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. This is a documentary from 2017 that explores the influence of Native Americans on nearly a century of rock and roll. This is a really cool documentary. If you like rock and roll, blues, jazz, Native American music, or anything in between, I loved this one. Have you guys heard of this? Seen it? Anything?
I have not, but I will be watching it.
I'm telling you, man, this one hits a lot of cool areas that I didn't know about the Native American influence on rock and roll. It's kind of astonishing.
Yeah.
For someone who's a music fan that
sounds like
didn't understand. Yeah. Please watch
Do you have any name dropping on that you can do?
As far as
influences that we might know of?
Charlie Patton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was Shoshone, I think. Please don't quote me on that. We will talk about it next week. But yeah, really, really good stuff. So check it out. Go check it out. You can stream it on Netflix or Prime. So it's on both of those. So if you have either of those, go check it out. Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. As I said at the beginning, rate and review our podcast. Follow us on all this stuff. If you've been listening this long, I want you to go to our social media, our YouTube, our, what do we have? Instagram, our Facebook, something. And I want you to say one word, and that will tell us that you listened to the end of this episode. And Connor, you're on the spot. Pick a word. Any word.
Doughboy.
Doughboy. I don't care how you spell it. I don't care what platform you use. Say the word Doughboy, and we will give you a shout out on one of our future episodes. Next week, join us as we power chord and powwow our way into the rock and roll movement, one documentary at a time. On behalf of Nick Dolan.
Aye, aye.
Connor Hoins.
Yes, sir.
Brice Necker.
Yep.
DJ in the booth and the entire Talkumentary family. I am your host, Jeff Kalaski, and I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you keep your minds open and be kind to each other. Goodbye.
Farewell.